Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with me this evening. And I want to give my deep, heartfelt gratitude to the Theosophical Society in America for giving me the opportunity to talk about heroes and how it is time for all of us to become one. So I always like to start with a little bit of information about who I am and why I chose this particular topic, because I think it's important to understand the perspective that someone is bringing to a topic. So I am a contemporary pagan priestess. Specifically, I am a high priestess, a Wiccan high priestess in the assembly of the Sacred Wheel, which is my tradition. It's kind of like a denomination. I'm also a longtime theosophist, and theosophical understandings and philosophy is one of the things that is part of my internal makeup of how I approach the world. Specifically, I am dedicated to a couple of the Hellenic great ones, in particular, Apollon, the god Apollo, who is the Lord of Light, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom. But I believe myself to be in relationship with quite a number of the Hellenic theoi, the ancient Greek gods. And I make no sense to myself at all without reincarnation. It is my understanding of myself that I have a number of things that I have carried around with me my entire life this time that are past life memories, many of them going all the way back into ancient Greece, which is a very formative time for me in terms of my own spiritual development, and that I came into this particular incarnation with relationships with a number of, again, the Hellenic, the ancient Greek gods, and some of the heroes, and that is something that has been with me throughout this entire incarnation and has roots in the past. I believe that relationships are always evolving and developing and changing, be they within a particular life or over many lives, but that is part of my understanding. So why this particular talk? So I love superheroes, and I think superheroes are the main way in which people in our culture have encountered this idea of heroes. But the problem with superheroes, as much as I love them, is that the path of a superhero is completely inaccessible. It is not real, and none of us could ever become a superhero. On the other hand, in ancient Greek culture, the path of the hero is something that is accessible to all of us, and I think there's a lot of value in it. And in particular, I think in this moment that we are currently in, our world needs people who are heroes at all levels. And so additionally to that, the technique of consciously living one's life as a heroic narrative is a tried and true spiritual evolutionary technique. And so for all of these reasons, I thought it would be a very timely thing for me to share with you my thoughts about heroes coming out of an ancient Greek perspective, but talking about how this is useful and important to us today. So first of all, what is a hero? As I said, most of us have encountered heroes through superheroes, but this idea of heroes, and in fact, the word hero and heroes actually comes out of ancient Greece. So the first thing from an ancient Hellenic perspective is that a hero is always a deceased person. So I guess what I'm actually saying is I think it's time for us to walk a heroic path, not necessarily to be a hero immediately, because a hero is always a deceased individual. But during the life of the being who became a hero, that person exhibited some particular excellence. The Greek word here is archetype, and I'm going to go through a little bit more about this later, but some particular excellence to the edge of human capacity. In other words, there was no place in that particular excellence for them to continue to grow so long as they were human. And that is within the context of their life. It is important to note that from this theory, the way in which the ancient Greeks understood heroes, heroes are not perfect. If you go and you look at the myths about heroes, they are definitely not perfect, but they were at capacity in some important domain. So in some important domain, there was no more room for them to grow as a human. Again, I want to emphasize this is not impossible because they are not perfect. In fact, in ancient Greek cultures, there were a lot of heroes, males and females. There are a ton of heroes. But one of the other major characteristics about a hero is that they lived their lives in ways in which they were of benefit to the community or to the world, not only to their near and dear. It is a natural human thing to be living in such a way as to be of benefit to those people who are near and dear to you. But heroes have a broader scope of care during their lives, which is important because, as I said, you don't actually become a hero until you are dead. And so the heroic afterlife is characterized by these beings who, after death, are intercessory beyond what one might expect from an ancestor. So what I mean by that is that ancient Greek people believed themselves to continue to be in relationship with these beings who had exhibited this excellence and this living in a beneficent way, larger than their near and dear, so larger than what is naturally human. And then after death, they would approach them and ask them for assistance, and they would receive assistance from these beings. So they are intercessory beyond what might be considered for an ancestor. Most of these traditions, including the ancient Greek traditions, do have ancestor reverence as part of it. But again, the natural human emphasis here is that an ancestor might be intercessory for those people that were near and dear, or might continue to care about their descendants. But a hero in death has that broader scope of care, and therefore in some traditions is considered one of the mighty dead. Now, I think it's really important for us to note that whenever you are looking at myth, be it myths about heroes or myths about gods, you always want to look at those myths within the context of the cult. So a cult is basically the entire package of how a living community maintains and builds healthy relationship with a being that is no longer in a body or was never in a body. So again, that could be a god, it could be a hero, but it includes the stories, the rituals, the feast days, the shrine, if there's a shrine, all of that kind of knowledge about how to maintain and build strong, healthy relationships with beings that are not in bodies. So in ancient Greece, there were a lot of hero cults. And I just want to emphasize, again, like I love superheroes, but this is the main difference between the Greek understanding of what a hero is and, say, Iron Man. So I want to talk about Achilles and Iron Man. So Achilles is the hero of the great epic, the Iliad, which is amazing. I love the Iliad. It's great fun. And again, we know Iron Man, Marvel, love that. The difference is that from an ancient Greek perspective, the people in ancient Greece believed themselves to be in continued relationship with a being, Achilles, who used to be a human and now is a real being, and that they pray to him for help for certain things in which he has exhibited excellence. They attribute success in certain ways to his assistance. They relate to him in dreams where they have him interacting with them in dreams. They believe they are working with a real being. Iron Man is a fictional character, and that has never been and is a fictional character. So hero cults are about real beings here. Now, some of the heroes go through a process that is called apotheosis. And one of the most common of these is Heracles. In Roman, that would be Hercules. So apotheosis is that after death, some heroes actually go through an additional transformation in which they fully become a god. And in this tradition, then, this is something some of the heroes after death, they continue, there's this idea they kind of continue to grow and continue to evolve, even though they are no longer human. And so there is this point in which they become a god, and this is essentially when they have fully graduated from humanity, is the way in which you could think about that. But the point here is that in these traditions, this means that this is something that is possible for a human. And so I think this is an important way of approaching it and considering it, that this is something that is a path that human beings can walk. Now, for those of you who grew up in some of the Christian traditions that have saints, you might say, well, this sounds really familiar. And you're right. There's reasons for this. The way in which saints after death, they maintain these powers, they have this excellence, and they are intercessory on behalf of humans. That is all very, very similar. And I would say in this situation, of course, the saint cults do come out of the same cultural milieu that had lots of hero cults. So I would say that all saints, by this definition, are heroes, but not all heroes are saints. Saints have within their frame of excellence, all of them, there's a type of moral purity that sometimes is there in heroes, but is not always there in heroes. On the other hand, historically, we can see that there are a number of saints that seem to have their origins as actually pre-Christian heroes who kind of became Christified. But the thing I want to emphasize here again is that heroes are not perfect. There are ways to walk this without necessarily already having become a saint, although that is one path. So again, this is possible. This is something that is a possible path to walk. Now, I do want to give a little bit more thought about the context in which we currently find ourselves and why I think this topic is important. It is my understanding, and you can take this as this is Gwendolyn's understanding, that we are currently in this moment in a time of seriously great challenge. And I would say, from my perspective, I believe that all of us are cells in larger beings. So I believe that as Gwendolyn, I am a part of the group mind of humanity. And that group mind of humanity is part of the mind of this planet. And I believe that this planet is currently going through what we might consider a very serious initiatory ordeal. And I see particularly the climate crisis as being that collective initiatory ordeal. So in any initiatory system, an initiation is something in which you are challenged through that ordeal that requires you to make a great leap, a great evolutionary leap in some way, be that on an individual level, if you're doing a personal initiation, or in this case, I'm talking about a planetary initiation and certainly a humanity-wide initiation, that we need to make a great evolutionary leap in order to succeed. And once you make that leap, then you can never go back to the way in which you were before. It fundamentally transforms you in some way that is truly eternal. So I believe that the climate crisis is this moment. Importantly, very, very importantly, there is never a guarantee that one is going to pass an initiatory ordeal, ever. And so I think we are really in this moment of crisis that if we can manage to do what we need to do collectively, it will transform us and open up entire new realms of growth. And if we don't, it will be devastating. So I believe that human beings, our main role is that we are part of the mind of the planet, is really where our emphasis is. And what we are in right now, I think, is that we are suffering from a crisis of imagination, and that we need to be able to dream radically new dreams, that we have dreams that have played themselves out in certain ways and are now destroying us, and that we need new dreams. It is also my belief, if you take this overarching theory of we are cells in the greater being that is humanity, humanity is a part of the mind of the planet, that part of the role of people like us, you know, occultists, magic workers, edge walkers, lots of artists and so forth, is that part of our role in the group soul is that we're part of the avant-garde. We're supposed to be out there pushing the edge of possibility. And part of this is kind of dream visionary work. And so one of the areas where I think we need to try to create new patterns is that we need to work towards becoming heroes, I think, in the way in which I just described, and to forge new pathways to heroism. One of the places where I see an old dream that I believe we have outgrown and need to think about in a different way is that I believe we have grown past the great man of history mode of heroes. Instead, I think so much of when you look at the climate crisis and you look at the various things that we need to approach, this is collective action. So what does it mean to be a hero in which you are not like the great person standing alone, but you are a hero in a different way of moving group mind and group effort forward? I also have some concerns, including in the kind of superhero universe, of the way in which our current understanding of heroes almost requires there to be an enemy or a monster for them to conquer. And so it requires almost as a prominent form, like an agonistic approach. And so I think we need new patterns for that. I think there are actually some old patterns that were already there, which I'll get into. But I think in addition, as we're thinking about new dreams, how is it that we can create pathways towards heroism that does not require an enemy or a monster to be overcome? And again, I just want to emphasize that if this understanding about us being part of a collective is real, and I think that it is, then any effort that we have as individuals to dream new dreams, to perfect ourselves, to become better humans, this actually does move the whole forward in important ways. So our individual efforts are always significant. And if we are doing it with the intention of being of benefit to the world, then that is part of walking a heroic path. So I do want to talk a little bit more about the initiatory path. I think that part of what this is, I mentioned before, the initiation are these moments in which you are challenged with an ordeal, and then if you can get through that ordeal, it transforms you in a fundamental way. And there are a few different types of initiations. One of them is a natural initiation that's like a coming of age situation, which might be what's happening right now. I think probably, again, this is Gwendolyn thinking this, I think this is part of what is going on with the group soul of humanity. I think the group soul of humanity is in a coming of age crisis. But individually, those of us who are choosing to walk a heroic path, this is an initiatory path, and it is about accelerating our evolution. So if we understand again that all of reality is vibration, and that vibration is energy, matter, and consciousness, and the way in which we perceive it as being one of those has to do with where our attention is, then part of what's happening here is that we exist on all of these different levels of vibration. And there is a place, like when you come into birth, you have your physical body, and you go through this process of getting control of your physical body while also your emotions are beginning to open when you're very, very, very young. And then you go through a process of becoming more aware and centered in your emotions as your mind is beginning to open. And that's the mind that is good at working in the world. And in all of these different ways, we continue to develop these capacities and strengthen the vehicles in which we're operating. And then there's a moment in the abstract mind, that mind that is not concerned with operating in the differentiated world. And at that place, that is where we begin to hit into those things that are immortal. They are outside this particular, more abstract level of mind. That's where you begin to hit the immortal aspects of self. And so part of what we're doing, and then above that, there's the part that has to do with the ideals, where it's more abstract, but it also has this kind of feeling nature, this intuitive feeling nature, and up into various forms of unity and so forth. That is all in the immortal aspects of self. So as we are going through an initiatory path, as we are beginning to walk, and I'll talk about how this works with the ancient Greeks, we're beginning to walk more of a heroic initiatory path. What we're trying to do here is to become more active and aware and stabilized on those higher levels of vibration, the parts that do not die away. And at the same time, we're working on training the lower aspects, our mind that is good at figuring stuff out and how to get through your commute, our emotions, our physical form. And eventually, over time, what happens is you have stabilization of awareness in that part that does not die away. And if you can hold that at the moment of death, and if you've achieved the kind of excellence that allows for that, then at the moment of death, when the parts that are transitory die away, you maintain continuity at the immortal level. And so that's kind of how I think the initiatory path part matches and maps onto some of the ancient Greek pieces. So I have some invitations for you. First of all, and I'm talking about kind of an initiatory path, but using this mode of the hero, I invite you to claiming an identity as being on the path to becoming a hero. And part of this means beginning to intentionally live your life as a heroic song. Okay, so ancient Greece is a song culture. And I want to give a shout out to Gregory Nagy. His work really helped me see a few things that were kind of some pieces that I did not have as clear. And I highly recommend his work. But ancient Greece is a song culture. And in song culture, the song itself happens in artificial time. It is outside of natural time. So when we think back to this idea that everything is vibration, and there is a point in which you're in the immortal aspects, and then everything that is down here below it, that is always coming into being and dying away and coming into being and dying away. But there is this part here that does not die away. This down here that's coming into being and dying away, that is natural time. Song culture, that is created. It is a mental creation, and it exists at this level that does not die away. So it is artificial time, but in some way, because it is timeless, it is more real in song culture. It is understood as being more real. So when you are hearing, say, the Iliad, if you were hearing it as an ancient Greek being sung by one of the rhapsodes, you are able to enter into this artificial time and experience the beings and the things there that are timeless. So this notion then of living your life as a heroic song and constructing this narrative allows you more access into the aspects of self that are immortal. And in the ancient Greek epics, and like I said, I love the Iliad, that's my favorite, the heroes are always searching for kleos aphthiton, and it means imperishable glory. And that imperishable glory is the song itself. It is the construction that is outside of time that cannot die away, and it is their reality within that. So if you decide to take me up on this invitation of trying to live your life as a heroic narrative and trying to basically sing your own rhapsody, then I encourage you to, among other things, one of the most common sources is to take a look at Joseph Campbell's work. He's got a lot there on the hero's journey. You'll see it in The Hero of a Thousand Faces. And there's a lot there in Jungian psychology as well that can be very helpful with this. I do want to take a quick moment and talk about recapitulation as you are working on developing your song, your heroic narrative that tells your own development of yourself as you are striving to be a hero. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, I talked briefly through this process as you're coming into incarnation and you are getting mastery over your physical body, and then you're getting mastery over your emotions, and then your like concrete mind that you're able to manage your work and all that with, and then up into the abstraction. There's a similar kind of process that happens in each incarnation. So every time you are born, you go through a process in which you are recovering the epiphanies that you would have had, like the various kinds of awakenings that you have had, and also any of your capacities. And frequently what this looks like for those of us who have been working in this way for multiple incarnations in some fashion is that often somewhere in your teens, and it goes into usually somewhere in your 20s, you have a lot of experiences of very big epiphanies that come almost without effort, like these huge, big awakenings. And often you'll get different capacities with them, and you have awakening and, you know, new capacity, and it's amazing. And it seems really easy. And then usually at some point in time, it feels like you kind of hit a wall. And from that point on, you may still be having epiphanies, you may still be getting new capacities, but it takes a lot more effort. And one of the things that I have encountered over and over again, and I was so grateful actually to learn about recapitulation and have this epiphany about that myself, because it often feels like, oh, this was so easy when I was younger. What happened? Am I doing something wrong? And the answer is no. The answer is that when you have all these very easy epiphanies and things opening up, that's because that's all the stuff that is reawakening and reactivating that you already had from previous incarnations. When you are working on something and it's really hard, that's because it's new growth in this incarnation. So I just wanted to put that out there, because I think this is something that we actually don't talk about a whole lot, but is often a source of anxiety for people as they are looking back and seeing their narrative and seeing a lot of rapid growth in the beginning of an incarnation, and then it just becomes a lot more difficult. That's because you're working on new stuff. Okay. So one of the models then that I think we could use, and is actually the one that I use in trying to think about a new mode of understanding heroism, is actually as an apprenticeship. So this is a model of a type of relationship that one could potentially have with one of the great ones, if that was, you know, the kind of relationship that you had with them. My understanding of myself is that this is the kind of relationship that I'm in with the god Apollo. So basically, it is a being in which you have a close relationship, and that being is kind of the model for the forms of excellence that you want to pursue. And if you are to construct your narrative in this way, then when you are doing the work in the world, you are doing it, if you're in this kind of relationship, as part of their retinue. In other words, part of what you're doing when you are trying to build the excellences that are native to, say, the god Apollo, is that you are mediating aspects of their power while also growing and shaping your own. So this is the way in which I have my own narrative constructed, and I think it is a worthwhile potential way of approaching this. But for those who are not in that kind of relationship, or choose not to be in that kind of relationship, or, you know, they just don't have that, you could still choose an area of excellence and apprentice yourself to that. And in fact, I mentioned earlier with Joseph Campbell, you could choose an archetype. Maybe it's an archetype of, say, a poet. You know, you could apprentice yourself to the ideal of a poet, for example. And then what you are doing is you are working to develop that excellence and mediate that power for the benefit of the world. And that is all in alignment with trying to live in a heroic way. So I do want to quickly go through some of the basic characteristics of a hero. First of all, a hero fundamentally is unseasonal. So for those who've looked a lot of Greek mythology, the goddess Hera is often the antagonist of a lot of the heroes. And again, I'm going to give thanks to Gregory Nagy, because this was a piece that I got more clarity on after reading his work. But the goddess Hera, she's the goddess of sovereignty, but she's also the goddess of natural time. And I mentioned earlier, when we're talking about song culture, you have this place in which you have all the stuff that kind of comes into being and dies away, comes into being and dies away. And then there's the immortal parts. Well, she's the goddess of everything that comes into being and dies away. She's the goddess of those cycles. But heroes are only like on time. They're only in their right place once they've ceased being mortal. And so in some way, they are out of sync with all of the kind of the flux of natural time. In Greek, the words for death, end, conclusion, perfection, ultimate purpose, and for an initiate of the mysteries are all basically the same word. They're very, very closely related, and those are very closely related concepts in ancient Greek. So again, if you are walking a form of a heroic path, any kind of initiatory path is accelerated evolution. What that means is that it is not natural. It is artificial, much like song culture. The song is artificial, but that puts it into the area that is immortal. That's where your focus is. But on a practical level, what that also means is that heroes are out of sync with their dominant culture. They are trying to accelerate something. And so they often do have kind of an ambivalent relationship a bit with the dominant cultures of wherever they are. There's something where they're a bit out of sync. And so that is also part of the experience. It's a feature, not a bug. If you are on this kind of path, you will feel somewhat alienated from your dominant culture, but that's because you are working on accelerating your evolution. Heroes are also extreme, certainly in the myths. In the myths, the heroes are very extreme in both they're good and they're bad. So I mentioned earlier that a hero is someone who, when they were living, they had developed excellence, ariti, up to the capacity in which there was no more room for growth as a human. So one of the key things to ask yourself is, what are the areas? What would the domain be that you would choose in which to develop excellence? And then to begin creating an intentional plan to do that. But to know that anytime we are becoming more excellent, we become more powerful. And anytime we become more powerful, we have greater potential to cause harm as well as good, which doesn't mean you don't do it. It doesn't mean that you don't choose a path of acceleration and choose to become more powerful. It just means that you need to be aware that that is always there as a potential. So there is a difference between hamartia is the Greek word, it's translated as sin, but it's the tragic mistake. It's a thing that you were operating with the best of intentions, but things worked out in a way that was harmful. There is a difference between that and hubris, in which it is something that is bad that comes from a flaw in your character. It causes moral outrage. But both of these cause miasma. Miasma is the spiritual pollution that comes from being out of right relationship. The reason this is important is that whenever we are increasing our power, which automatically increases our potential to cause harm, we have to pay particular attention to ensuring that we are addressing flaws in our character so that we do not create things out of hubris, and that we are regularly purifying any miasma that we have caused. You have to take a lot of more conscious responsibility for this. The more your power goes up, the more your responsibility to take care of these things also increases. And so we have the Delphic maxims from the temple of Apollon at Delphi, know thyself and nothing in excess, or a couple of the big reminders there. So I do want to talk quickly about ariti, excellence. It's translated as both excellence and virtue. And in a different video that I have done for the Theosophical Society, you will see a lot about philosophy that talks in much more depth about this topic, should you want to go look at that. But I do want to quickly talk about some of this as it relates to the heroes. So this excellence, there are some foundational virtues, and all virtues are created through intentional practice and habit building. But I often think of the moral virtues as being right relationship. That's how I kind of understand it. So moderation, for instance, is right relationship to pleasure. Courage, right relationship to fear. Sincerity or confidence is another way to think about this, is right relationship to recognizing your own merit. What are you actually good at and what are you not so good at? Gentleness is right relationship to anger. Generosity, right relationship to resources. And then there are a set of the intellectual virtues that are important to think about in terms of developing excellence. Prudence is practical wisdom. So, the moral virtues may tell you what your end goal is, but it's actually, you need prudence in order to figure out how to get there. So that is one of the key intellectual virtues that almost everybody needs to spend time on. Temperance is the virtue that when your mind tells you something is bad, you are able to resist it. Philia is the love that is friendship, and that is both, is that individual deep caring for another person. It is both an excellence in and of itself, and also friendship is the medium for development. That is often the type of relationship in which we develop our virtues with each other. Friendship is always, always a moral relationship. And then contemplation, meditation, these are other kinds of intellectual virtues. The reason that I wanted to quickly bring up these types of virtues in thinking about heroes is that if you choose a particular type of specialization, a particular type of excellence that you are going to develop, it may also require special emphasis on developing some of the moral virtues. So, for example, if you decide that you are going to walk a heroic path and the part that you are called to walk is a warrior path, that what you are trying to do is become a heroic warrior. And that doesn't have to be like a military person. That could be that you decide that you are going to become a lawyer fighting for underprivileged children or something, but that idea that you are going to become a warrior, then you really better pay special attention to developing courage, which is right relationship to fear, and gentleness, right relationship to anger, because you will need to be very excellent in those two areas if you're also going to be excellent in the path of the warrior. Another example, the path of the visionary. And this is the one that I resonate with. So for that, I would say truthfulness. And for myself, as an example of this practice, whenever I discover that something I have said is wrong, or that, I inadvertently misled someone, I have a practice in which I must publicly correct myself, no matter what. That is part of this practice that I have to do. And also confidence, which is recognizing when you're good at something and recognizing when you're not so good at something. In order to be visionary, you must have special emphasis in those as examples. But any of those, I would think about what are the types of virtues that you must specifically emphasize in your own development in order to be able to achieve excellence in a balanced way. So again, we have a few moral reminders here. All things work from the inside out. You develop your character through developing habits, and we are social beings. Your friends shape your character. So you want to both find and be good friends. In your relationships, you should be making them better people and they should be making you better people. If that is not happening, that is a relationship to investigate and make some determinations about. So in ancient Greek myths, you will often see a relationship in which a hero is in a divinely antagonistic relationship with one of the gods. So I mentioned earlier, like Hera, the goddess Hera, she is in this relationship with many of the gods. But for example, with Hercules, this divine antagonism is a very interesting pattern. So Heracles, the name actually means the glory of Hera. That's what his name means. So I think the way to understand these divine antagonisms when we're looking at the myths about ancient heroes is to see the gods as initiators, the people who are bringing the ordeals that are what push the hero into that next level of development. So some characteristics that you will typically see in all of these is that the god that is antagonistic to the hero is also the god who the hero is most like. So for example, in the Iliad, the divine antagonism there is between Achilles and the god Apollon. And when you look at Achilles, Achilles he's always shown with kind of light and fire imagery that is very much Apollonian energy, and the expressions there. He is a very gifted healer. He is shown as a musician where he is singing. He is bringing the law to Agamemnon and challenging lawlessness. He was raised by Chiron, who is the adopted son of Apollo and is trained in healing and so forth by him. So he is a god who is most like Apollo, and these various trials that he's given are making him more and more like that in a particular way, but they're in this kind of antagonistic relationship. But they also often have this very fatal attraction. So the hero has a fatal attraction for the god who is most likely going to kill him. But you see in the old myths where it is in this process, again, if we think a human being does not become a hero in actual sense until after death, and that is kind of their initiation, their rebirth. So the god can also sometimes be playing the role of a mentor. For example, Athena with Odysseus. But in these various myths, what you will see is that it is usually a god driving the trials that help accelerate the evolution. And Athena and Hera are kind of an interesting one with Hercules that way, where Hera is the one who's always setting up these trials, and then Athena is the one who's also acting in a role of mentor and getting him through. So sometimes, as an example, with Odysseus and Athena, or Heracles and Athena, they're also working in direct partnership. But I think for us, if we're thinking about it and we think about what are the gods that we are, or what are the archetypes or whatever that we're encountering, we're mediating that divine power into the world as part of what is happening through this kind of initiatory moment. I do want to take a quick moment for Ares, the god of war, because initiation through combat is the most historically common mode in which people were transformed into heroes. But I think this is something that even amongst contemporary pagans, we really are not understanding a lot of times what's actually going on there. So this is the path of the sacred warrior. And I just want to talk a little bit about like, what would this combat look like? Because I think it also has some relevance for us. Okay. In order for combat to be divine sacred combat, there are a number of different qualifications. First of all, it's usually one-on-one, and it must be by choice. Both participants must be there because they choose to be there. They must be evenly matched, so that it is not clear which one of them is going to win. They're evenly matched. It must be very intimate. And the warriors in this exchange, they must have full and present consciousness about the fact that they are hazarding their mortal life. And what they're doing is facing death in a way that overcomes every mortal instinct for self-preservation. That's actually the big initiatory ideal. So what that requires then is identification and stabilization in the immortal aspect of one's being at the moment of death. And therefore, at that moment, that is when they are considered, the person who has been killed is considered to have been initiated by Ares. And then there is the warrior who is living, who goes on to do this until eventually they also are initiated by Ares and become a hero. So I am in no way, shape, or form suggesting that we should go back to this. Like, I'm really, really not. And I do want to emphasize, though, how different that is and how absolutely abhorrent that is, that current warfare is from this perspective. If this is like what warfare was supposed to be, our current version has nothing to do with this whatsoever. But I do think it's useful from the perspective of we will all face death at some point. And if we understand how to do this in a way in which we are choosing that we are going to face it, that it is intimate, we have absolute full and present consciousness of that fact, and we're trying to face death in a way that overcomes our mortal instincts towards self-preservation by stabilizing and identifying in that part that does not die away, that is really kind of still the same function. So I just wanted to share that, because it's, if you look at the epics, it is full of divine combat, but it's not something that is easily understood from our contemporary perspective. So going back then to this idea of beneficence, we said that a hero, anyone who's walking a heroic path, they have to be a benefit beyond those who are near and dear. And so as a practice then, when you're building your own heroic song that you are singing that is giving you this idea of yourself and how you are living in such a way that you are on a heroic path, intentionally building in your motivation and sense of purpose to be of benefit to the world is an important thing. And, you know, intentionally cultivating big picture thinking. And then as you put it into your heroic song, part of what that's doing is, as you're telling yourself the story about yourself, then that is actually increasing your capacity to truly be beneficent, because that's going to be part of who you understand yourself to be when you are then out acting in the world, and will drive you towards actually living that way. So one of the big things from ancient Greek hero myths is that many of them do use what is called theoria as part of their structure. Theoria is a sacred journey, it's a pilgrimage. And I think that there is a lot of value in framing your story as you are looking at your life and understanding your life and learning it in terms of this idea of sacred quests. And again, remembering that in song culture, the time of song is more real than our kind of daily experience of natural time, because it is immortal. So if we are working on building this idea of sacred quest, and we are looking at our lives and understanding it in this way, that is enabling us in that moment to begin building things that are more in that immortal part of ourselves. And there's a lot of very good precedent for this. In the Apology, in Plato's Apology, Socrates describes his life's work of philosophizing as a theoria, as a sacred journey that he is taking. In order to do this, though, I believe that it's important for us to build time in which we have some solitude and we can engage with our own minds with no external influence from other minds, because that's part of how we can actually have the space to function at that higher level and be thinking about our lives as pilgrimage, as sacred quest. And so I am a huge believer in setting up some time in which you go on retreat. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go anywhere, because it's great if you can, but not everyone can afford to do that. But even if you just say, I am now in this time, I'm going to take a few days and I am going to not have external input. I am going to sit and go through my story with myself and think about things without having external input. I think it's very important to give ourselves that kind of time. So as part of any sacred journey, one of the things that the hero does is go out into the eschatia. Eschatia is the Greek word for the furthest most reaches. So they are leaving the normal place and time. And basically in this way, part of what we're doing is we are stepping outside the norms of our society. And this gives us an opportunity to unmake our socialization. So there's all of the things that we kind of inherit from our society, and having this time as you are developing your life as a heroic journey in which you are unmaking your socialization and you are deciding then which are the things you're going to keep and which are the things you're going to reject. So that is part, I think, of this process and of this path. And in the eschatia, in the furthest most reaches, there are two kinds of beings that have human origin. There are monsters and there are heroes. The difference between whether or not someone remains a hero or becomes a monster has to do with whether or not the motivation to be a benefit continues to be the driver. So again, having a practice in which you continuously build that motivation to be a benefit is an important aspect here. Another part of the escatia of the journey is that ability to move between levels of consciousness and operate all the vehicles at will. And in myth, this is often talked about as underworld and upper world. It's also used in shamanism, but this idea in which you are able to consciously move between levels of consciousness. And so all of this in your sacred journey, this is part of what you're doing. You're exploring and going out into the escatia, out into the part that is beyond the norms of society and beyond the normal types of consciousness. So all heroes and in all hero stories, the hero must face ordeals. And again, this is also part of an initiatory path. And ordeals in this sense are those challenges that force you to stretch your capacity and therefore expand and develop further. Now, I do think as we are trying to walk a heroic path, having those moments in which we think through our lives and think about what are the ordeals that we are facing? How is this giving me an opportunity to stretch and to grow are really important. It's also important, though, to be focused on developing prudence. Again, prudence is practical wisdom that helps us understand once we know where we want to go, what is our plan to get there? And in this case, we also need to discern, build our discernment about what is a good stretch that is helping me grow and what is actually going to cause injury. So as we are thinking through these ordeals, we can, in our sacred song of our path here, give sacred context to those ordeals that we are facing and work to crystallize the lessons that we are learning from them. Again, with the discernment, it is very important to kind of make a determination between what is an ordeal that is an initiatory ordeal that is helping us grow, and when is something just a distraction that we need to move out of the way. And I would say that as you're going through your song, if the same theme keeps coming up over and over again, if you're constantly facing ordeals that have a very similar character, that is a good opportunity to pay attention and dig deeper to try to get to what is the root ordeal behind that or under it. And I would say, as we are thinking about our lives through this structure of ordeals, to be careful about making other living beings into monsters in your imaginary. So that is something to avoid, I believe. And again, I do also want to go back to this idea of miasma. So miasma is that spiritual pollution that comes from being out of right relationship with ourselves, with the gods, with each other, with the earth, all these different things. But part of the reason why walking a heroic path, I think, can be an important benefit to the world is that when you have a being, a human, who is striving towards achieving excellence, the limit of human capacity in some way, is living in such a way as to be a benefit beyond their near and dear, to have that greater scope of care, and is more consciously open, aware, and stabilized in the immortal aspects, then they are also stronger in the group soul. They have a stronger presence in the group soul of humanity. So that whenever a hero is cleansing miasma, the process there is called catharsis, that actually means to cleanse. What happens is that they are not only cleansing it from themselves, but it helps cleanse from the group. It helps cleanse that miasma from the group. And this is a huge part of both ancient Greek hero cult and in the myths. So that when one of the heroes that is associated with the group soul of their society is going through this cleansing process, it cleanses the entire society. And I believe that this is part of why we desperately need heroes in this moment. We need people who are able to do some of this miasma purification and cleaning on a level that can impact group soul, because there is a lack of miasma right now. So in order to give you a little bit of a sense of the range of excellences that can lead towards heroism, I wanted to go through some of the heroes here. So these are some examples of heroes and the excellence that they developed up to the level of human capacity that come out of the ancient Greek system. So first of all, there's Heracles, Latin Hercules. He's kind of the hero. And he is, in all likelihood, actually a Neolithic hero. If you look at his weapon, which is a club, if you look at his skin, if you look at the areas in which he was having his various labors, there's every indication that this is actually a Neolithic hero. He is very, very, very old. And a large part of what he is doing is developing excellence, not only of strength, but also of perseverance and of the willingness to hazard himself and the willingness to be of benefit to others. Achilles and Patroclus, who are the great heroes of the Iliad, have a couple of excellences. Achilles is the most powerful warrior in the ancient Greek world. So he has the excellence of a warrior, but together and in hero cult, they were always worshipped together. They had developed the excellence of friendship and love for each other to the point in which there was no further growth that could happen in a human capacity. Odysseus, the star of the Odyssey, he is polymetes, which means he's very intelligent. He's very, very clever. And he is one of the ones who goes on this great journey. And he also has the excellence of what is called the Kubernetes, which is where we get governor. He's steering the ship of state. So he has excellence as a leader of humans. Asclepius is excellent as a healer. Ariadne, I find very interesting. Ariadne's excellence that she develops up to the level of human capacity to the point where she not only is a hero, but she becomes a god. She's one of the ones who goes through Apotheosis, is that she knows how to allow herself to be loved. And I think that's really beautiful and certainly something that we often don't think of as an excellence, but really is an excellence. Socrates is the lover of wisdom. Aglauros, who was a princess of ancient Athens, has exhibited duty and courage up to the level in which she has no further room to grow. And all of the new citizens of Athens would take their oaths to be good citizens to Aglauros. Homer is a poet, and all of these had hero cults. Every one of these people on this list, they had hero cults, so they do meet this definition. So I just wanted to give you a sense. There's a lot more, but a sense of the range. So just to wrap up, if we are going to walk the path of a hero, which I invite you to do, you want to choose some form of excellence to pursue that will then be kind of your heroic identity. And then you intentionally develop the most essential moral virtues associated with that. You commit to beneficence beyond the human level, so beyond just serving your near and dear, and you pay attention to when you are using those immortal capacities. You guard against hubris and hamartia, so against the badness that arises from your character, or also from the tragic mistakes, and you work to purify miasma. And then you tell yourself your story in a framework of heroic song as you are going through your life. You choose your heroic role, you make sense of your journey, and you make sense of your ordeals while you are working to be of benefit of all beings. And so thank you so much for being with me today. I very much appreciate it.